I would request our Honorable Chief Guest for the day, Dr. Kavita A. Sharma, to please say a few words and enlighten everyone present.
When we have wealth, there has to be proper use of it. And what is the proper use? It creates, it nurtures, it enriches and enhances all living things and all living beings. That is the way it has to be used. The second, it supports, it sustains, it brings together everybody and everything. And finally, which is I think very important and very topical and very important for us to remember, it must be used in a way to free people from fear and violence. Those are the three important principles laid out for the getting of wealth and use of its wealth. I was also very happy to find so much of community involvement and the reaching out and learning from the communities. The kind of passion that the students told me about the mosque, for example, the Baoli here, the fort here. And it's also perhaps because of our colonial past, which actually colonizes minds which take a very long time to decolonize themselves. We may say that it's already 60 odd years and why are we not yet looking at ourselves? I think the process is just about beginning. But as I was talking to Ms. Rosemary, that Tagore had that vision, that you must bring everybody together from the communities around. That's how he set up Shantiniketan, and to the world outside. So it has to create an ecosystem of education from the near to the far. And that was the dispute he had, or disagreement he had with Mahatma Gandhi, who wanted to put educational institutions in the immediate nationalistic stream. And on a more personal note, I found a couple of letters of that exchange between our legendary principal at Hindu College, N.V. Thadani, and Mahatma Gandhi. When Gandhi wrote to Thadani that Hindu College as an institution must be put into the nationalist independence movement, Mr. Thadani wrote back that with all due respects, people may do what they want, but as an institution, they must pursue their educational goal in the widest sense of the term. And you see the wisdom of what he said. Now, talking of Gandhi, he did have one very important vision, which I think, again, all of us need to remember, and obviously the school is remembering it. He talked of basic education, which somewhere along the line we actually discredited, because I think we didn't understand it. Zakir Hussain tried to carry it forward as Nai Talim. And what did he say? He said you must approach education through the craft tradition of India, which is what keeps India, or which is what has made India into what Jeevan Pani would say, a superpower in culture. And when we neglect the craft tradition, we do certain things. What has happened in our education system is that we privilege the head over the hand. But if you make an entry through the crafts, through the hand, then that hierarchy of privileging the head over the hand stands demolished. And therefore it leads to greater amount of equity. Because of this privileging, what has happened, that it has somehow that padhoge, likhoge to haath se kyun kaam karoge? But it's actually the other way around. Unless you put your hands into the soil of this country, you cannot make this country grow up and go forward. Now, it reminds me of a very, I think, outstanding kind of a graduation narration, which I have summarized for our purposes here. David Orr gave somewhere in the early 90s. I think he must have been very visionary. And he called it the 6 myths of education, which I want to place before you. One is that we think that ignorance is a solvable problem. Actually, ignorance has never been a solvable problem, because the more you know, the more that you need to know. And so many areas of ignorance open up in front of us. The second was that if we have enough knowledge and technology, we will be able to manage planet Earth. I don't think I need to elaborate on it. We have not managed to manage planet Earth at all. What is important to actually focus on is to how to manage our own desires, our own needs, and our own politics, our own economics. Because even now we just talk of sustainable development. What is sustainable development? It's not paradigm shift at all. It is just that please don't be so greedy that you don't leave it for the next generations. Actually, we need to look at alternative paradigms of development which would not deplete this planet Earth the way we deplete it. His third myth was that there is a belief that as knowledge will increase, we will become very rational people and therefore human goodness will increase. That stands demolished completely. We have not managed to prevent disparities. We have not managed to prevent world wars. We have not managed to prevent regional conflicts. We have not managed to prevent poverty, hunger from the face of the earth, forced migration, cruelty. So as our knowledge has increased, it has actually led to more cruelty. As Bertrand Russell says, we are taught to love our neighbors on Sundays, but all the rest of the 6 days of a week we are taught to hate them. And that is why this society privileges competition over collaboration. The actual way to progress is not competition, but actual collaboration. And to give an example, if all the parts of our body started to compete with each other, we would not exist. And this is coming to us from our also now international regimes on various things, including from personal things like marriage, divorce, maintenance, to environment regimes, trade regimes, and all the rest of that. Then the fourth myth of education is that we think we can restore what we have destroyed. Actually, we can never restore what we have destroyed. And that is why we are facing what we are facing today. The fifth myth of education is that education, and this is very prevalent among parents, being a parent myself, I can say this, that education is a means to provide upward mobility and material success. It is not really. That's a corollary, that's not the main aim. And our final myth is that we think our culture is at the peak, at the pinnacle of human achievements. Actually, it is not, because we have destroyed, through education, all that is worth living for. Our rivers are polluted, our marine life is dying, our forests are denuded, we have completely destroyed our fresh air, water, food, anything that we actually need to grow and to live and to sustain ourselves. And that is why what exactly I think you're attempting to do in this school, from the little glimpse that I have had, I would take you to what Sri Aurobindo said, that education is an education of all 5 parts of our being. He actually got it from the kosha theory of the Upanishads, but he contemporized it. And he said, it is our physical that needs to be nurtured, our vital, which is our driving power, which can drive you to anger and it can transform itself to great sacrifice. Our mental, the mind, is what most educational institutions keep focusing on. Our conscience, our ethics, or the psychic being, as he said, and finally our spiritual. Spiritual had become a bad word, but now I see a lot of emotion quotient and spiritual quotients being talked about, and so obviously we are coming back to the idea that we need something beyond ourselves to be able to sustain what we are doing. And therefore, how do we get all this? We don't get all this by becoming teachers with authority of perception, knowledge. We become teachers who share in the journey of exploration. And therefore, the 3 important pedagogical principles that nothing can be actually taught. And you'd say that to teachers, they immediately look back and stunned. We can only facilitate, we can only point the way. As the Buddhists would say, you can point a finger at the moon to show you the moon, but you cannot take that person to the moon. The second is that the mind has to be consulted in its own development. And that is why Jiddu Krishnamurti would say, please do not concentrate on exams. They are the worst in trying to deaden your mind rather than consult it in its own development. And the third is that you have to learn from the near to the far, from the familiar to the unfamiliar. We all start the opposite way. Our textbooks keep getting designed the opposite way. And that is why Krishnamurti says that when we concentrate too much on information, on examinations, while we neglect the other side of the child, which is the aesthetics, which is the vital, which is the psychic, which is the spiritual, then we make very lopsided, one-sided human beings. And therefore the whole idea is that you have to be situated within, but you have to be equally good in what you do outside. So really the journey, the Western journey as it has come to us from the Reformation and Renaissance to the Industrial Age to the period of Enlightenment, which we have bought into, is that the journey is from outside to within. It's actually the other way around. It's from inside to outside. And therefore, educational institutions have to also develop not just a proficiency in teaching knowledge as we know it, but also uncovering the layers of the mind of the child to be able to integrate that whole personality. Because otherwise what will happen is we'll create perfect professionals, as we do create, but full of jealousies, full of anger, full of despair, dissatisfied, disorder, and that translates itself into our working environment, which we all know and which we experience, and it creates disorder in society. And therefore, you can have a great society, you can have a very efficient society, but not necessarily a good society. And therefore disorder always will break in whenever, even when the society seems to be running perfectly well and doing perfectly well. As we see today, breaking out in many parts of US, which thought it had reached the pinnacle of its own growth and development. And therefore, the proper education will be where the child can move out and in with equal ease, simultaneously, and be stationed in both, and also learn to respect worthwhile human beings and his own self-worth. How do you recognize this potential and cultivate it? One is profound respect for the other, which is again to be free, and this is what schools have to begin right from the beginning. No room for racism, no room for exploitation, no room for our biases. We must oppose dogma, inflexible moral positions. We must accept that there must be sexual preferences which are at variance from ours. We have to accept that there are different ethnic identities with their own ideas of what is progress for them and what is good for them. We have to be gender sensitive. This must begin right from the beginning. We must be aware of physical differences and disabilities and learn to accommodate them. Why? Because if we don't accommodate that, we reduce the other person's dignity, but in so doing, we reduce our own dignity and we reduce the dignity of society. And I will end now with a little story which I actually love very much. It's a Zen story. It is that there was a very wise man who came and sat down at the edge of a village, and he would talk to people, and gradually the crowd around him began to grow, and people came to him with all kinds of their issues and problems and dilemmas and so on and so forth. There was one young boy, 13, 14 years, who disliked this quite wholeheartedly, this foggy old man who sits there and talks nonsense every evening. So he said, I'm going to expose him. So he took a butterfly in his hand and he put it into his hand and he closed his fingers over it. And he said, I'm going to go to this man and say, alive or dead. If he says alive, I will crush it, it will be dead. If he says dead, I will open my fingers and the butterfly will fly away. Either way, he will be proved wrong and therefore his influence will diminish. So he went there when his congregation was at its peak, and he went to this man and he said, alive or dead? The man looked at him for a moment and smiled and said, it is in your hands. So, whether it is alive or dead, this is true of our life, it is actually in our hands. Thank you very much for hearing me with patience and giving me this opportunity. Thank you.